Let's have a quick talk about what happened at YCS Birmingham, all right? Both for my personal performance and also for the format in general, because obviously it's been a pretty hype YCS to say the least. Even though I personally didn't do as well, I still wanted to show the deck that I used because I do think that it is important to not only revisit whenever you top or win, but also revisit your deck building process and all that kind of stuff. When it's not going so well, I'm going to show off the deck that I played and talk a little bit about why I thought this deck was good and then what ended up happening, because I do think that is also a valuable lesson to be learned. I played pure Ryziel. The reason we decided to play pure Ryziel, it was a couple of us in the team. I felt like for how the meta was a couple of weeks ago when we started testing, the Ryziel deck seemed a little bit more resilient to the tech cards that people were playing as opposed to the Fiendsmith Ryziel. You know, people were playing a lot of Droll and Lockbird, a lot of Bystials, a lot of Molcharmi Fuvalos. That just was something that we were trying to find a better solution to than just playing Fiendsmith Ryziel, because Fiendsmith Ryziel felt like the deck with the higher ceiling but less flex spots and just bigger weaknesses into those kind of cards. With the introduction of Eclipse Twins, I also felt like the Fiendsmith cards get a lot weaker at breaking boards, because one major play that people would do with Engraver was you would be able to summon a Chaos Angel to out a Detonator. If the Detonator has an Eclipse Twin under it, that doesn't work anymore. The other decks I was considering, obviously Fiendsmith Ryziel was an option for me. Mitsurugiel Ryziel was a deck that I find very fun, but I kind of discarded it relatively early into the testing process because I just felt like it was too inconsistent, even though I do think the deck's very powerful. I will say I spent a total of, I want to say like 10 games playing Dinh-Kha Bui's Fire King deck, but I ultimately decided not to follow it anymore. The problem was basically I knew Dinh-Kha Bui was going to play that deck, and other people in the team were saying like, oh, Dinh-Kha Bui is just playing his fun deck, whatever, ignore it. And I'm like, you know what? No, I trust Dinh-Kha Bui enough to at least give it a try. So when we met in person with a couple of people from the team, I actually brought the Fire King deck along. On that day, the Fire King deck actually did surprisingly well for me. Like, I played it for like 10 games against Fiendsmith Ryziel. I won like 7 or something. So I was like, you know what? This is actually pretty good. The unfortunate thing is, I guess unfortunate in hindsight, when I tested pure Ryziel on that day, it went even better. I was like, you know what? I like the Fire King deck, but I'm going to focus on Ryziel. Turns out maybe I should have believed even harder in Dinh-Kha Bui. I want to go over this list real quick. The approach was, I think, pretty cool because it was more of a board breaker approach. First, you have the 10 Ryziels, of course, and then the only hand traps we played were Ash and Fuvalos, because I felt like those were the overall best ones. I'm gonna be honest with you, you can beat any Fiendsmith deck going second without drawing a single hand trap. The only card that can consistently beat Malice going second game 1 is like Fuva. If you're playing cards like Valor or Impermanence, I feel like it's just copium against Malice, because they are way more likely to have an extender through Imperm or Valor than to not have an extender. We decided to not even bother with it. We're citing a couple of stuff specifically for Malice, but game 1, if Malice goes first and we don't have Fuva and they don't break, then they can just have it. Take your win with your combo deck. We'll go to the next game. We'll win game 2 going first, and then we'll just draw a Lancia or a Charmy in game 3. That's literally the plan. I'm not playing no hand trap mini game with the Malice deck. And I'm happy to report that I actually didn't lose to a Malice. We're rounding out the engine with 3 Bonfire and 2 Ryziel Cross because we're playing Desires. That's why there's 2 Ryziel Cross, because this card's very important. And the rest is just a bunch of cool board breakers. 3 Talents, 3 Ultimate Slayer, 3 Metal Tronus, 3 Book of Moon, 3 Book of Eclipse, and a Cult by the Grave. The cool part about most of this non-engine that I thought was really special for this format, and it's not something that you can do very often, is that you can play a lot of board breakers that are good going first and second. Book of Moon and Book of Eclipse are phenomenal cards going first because they help you play through Imperm and Valor, which is basically in everyone's deck right now. So these cards force through Duo Drive a lot. Metal Tronus is both a phenomenal board breaker and a great card to set versus any sort of Ryziel variant. The only card here that only functions going second, quote unquote, is Ultimate Slayer. However, my experience in this format is that if this deck goes first, it never dies. The thing that happens most of the time is your opponent tries to break your board. Sometimes they succeed and they will end on their own detonator. And then turns out the Ultimate Slayer is still good on the follow-up turn. The only thing that this deck really loses to when it goes first is Charmies. In order to solve that problem a little bit in the mirror matches, we're trying to go second after siding. Basically, when our opponents are expecting to go second, they're going to put in all the Charmies. We're sending them going first. They're just going to like make a detonator and a Caesar, and this just runs over it, especially if the non-engine that they have in their hand is like Charmies. That is the 40 card main deck. Genuinely, I don't really have complaints about this because I lost to Branded in round 3. I don't feel bad about not really preparing for Brand because it was not a matchup that was to be expected. It's actually funny because they locked me with Yugioh, the Supreme Magical, whatever it's called, which I actually have 6 outs to in my deck because Yugioh is not like Gimmick Puppet. Yugioh has to be face up on the board to lock you. So in game 1, they put their whole hand into an Yugioh lock, and I have a Book of Eclipse, and I just run over them. And then game 2 and 3 were just like really unfortunate games. The side deck is 3 Lancea just for Malice, 3 Meowls just for Malice, 3 Droll and Lockbird. This is mainly to put some respect on Mitsurugi and Mermail. You know, decks that we have admittedly a bad matchup game 1 if we go second. 3 Gravekeeper's Inscription. Shout outs to Steven Santoli who played this card at YCS Orlando. I think this card is phenomenal versus Malice. Going first or second, it doesn't matter. You call, cards cannot be banished from the graveyard. It basically disables Whitebinder, which also in extension disables a lot of other things from their end board. But the cool thing about this card is that it lasts for 2 turns. It significantly helps you break their board, but you don't actually have to kill them because it still locks them on their follow-up turn, which is huge. And then we play 2 Lightning Storms and a Feather Duster. We side these cards into a lot of matchups simply because there's a lot of popular trap cards right now. But the thing is, like, both Malice and Ryziel decks, they will always have some sort of spell traps that you can get value out of. You will notice we don't play many hand traps versus Ryziel. They will basically almost always have Ryziel Cross. If they have Ryziel Cross, Lightning Storm or Feather Duster are always at least valuable. But if they hard draw any sort of Metaltronus, Solemn Strike, Infinite Impermanence, which are incredibly common cards right now, then Lightning Storm just goes +2 or 3 and helps you break the boards so much easier. For the matchups I was expecting, I don't really have much of a complaint here with this side deck. You can see here that there's not much here for Branded at all. And what ended up happening, I had to side out Metaltronus because I just can't activate Metaltronus versus Branded. So I took out Metaltronus for Droll and Lockbird going second. I opened Droll and Lockbird as my only hand trap, and I'm like, okay, you know what? Maybe if they don't have hard draw Branded Fusion, I can stop them from getting to it this way. Turns out they hard opened Branded Fusion in 46 cards in game 2. I scoop it up after they make their board. We go into game 3, and because I don't have much for Branded when I go second, I have to go first. And so I go first into Branded. I draw Droll and Lockbird. I put in Gravekeeper's Inscription because I wanted to side out the Ultimate Slayers as well going first, and 3 Ryziel cards. That should be fine. They go Draw Phase, Purulia, and Fuvalos in 46. I'm like, well, shit, I cannot play into that without giving them infinite cards. And Branded is not the type of deck that you can give infinite cards to because then they will just murder you. So I'm like, okay, you know what? I have Droll and Lockbird, so there's a realistic chance I can stop them from accessing Branded Fusion because I also have Gravekeeper's Inscription. What I'm going to do is I'm going to activate Gravekeeper's Inscription, no effects in the graveyard. So no Retribution, no Serenir, no Albion in their end phase and all that kind of stuff. And I also have a Droll and Lockbird so they can't go too crazy with all the other things that they might play. So I'll just pass. You know, they got 3 cards in hand, they're drawing the 4, how bad can it be? Turns out they hard drew Branded Fusion again. First action, activate Branded Fusion. They don't kill me, but they freaking Yugioh lock me again and I don't have an out. Sometimes there's games that are not meant to be won, you know? The extra deck is complicated because we play Slayer and Metaltronus, so there was a little bit of a space problem, but for the most part, it was fine. When you play Metaltronus, I do think you need 3 detonators. If you want to banish your opponent's detonator and you only have 1 left, that can be a problem. So there's 3. 1 Duo Drive. You don't really need more than 1. You try to resolve the 1. If it does, then you win anyways. And if it doesn't, you can still revive it later with Eclipse Twins, which is a 2 of. Light Drag Adignister is our Metaltronus target versus Malice, 2300 Cybers. This is important because you can summon it when you're already locked into rank 4s. Exciton. Starliege is a card that in the beginning I thought it was very, very niche and very overrated. Currently, I felt like there was a development towards this kind of version. We were not the only ones at this event playing cards like Ultimate Slayer and Metaltronus and Book of Moon in the main decks, right? I played against multiple people with the same kind of idea. Even though I did like my list, I don't think my list is anything super crazy, like undiscovered. If you notice in game 1 that your opponent is on a more board breaker heavy approach, what you can do in this deck, you can make Starliege Photon and then Duo Drive and then use Duo Drive's effect and detach from the Photon. That way your Duo Drive keeps its materials. And so when you end on this board, but the Duo Drive has 2 material, this is 2000 attack, which means nothing here is targetable, meaning that all of these are dead. This card is really, really broken against this version of the deck, which coincidentally is also what I lost to in round 7. They had a lot of very similar ideas. I won game 1 and game 2 they go first and they go for this exact opener. And my hand is all 3 of these and 3 engine cards. I scoop it up and then I face a difficult decision. Here's the thing. I told you guys earlier, our plan was to go second in the mirror match because this deck is normally super good going second in the mirror match. And we don't even have Charmies or something that we can side in the mirror match. After I saw that they play this too, I'm like, I can't make them start, because if they do this again, and if I don't have Book of Eclipse, I just can't beat this. I picked first because I felt like their deck was too well equipped to go first themselves. In theory, I can do the same thing to them, right? They were also playing Book of Moon. I saw Metatronus, I think. I saw Slayer. Problem is I got Molcharmy, Fuvalos, and Peruliat again. Yeah, there's an Abyss Dweller. There's a Gaga Cowboy, because we are playing Board Breakers, so it can take a while sometimes, and we had one space for it. It did not come up for this event. Maybe also because I didn't play that many rounds. Typhon, Aggregator, and Garura, and Bucephalus. The extra deck, I think I wouldn't change anything. I think for what we expected, this deck was good. I ended up playing against a couple of things that I didn't anticipate, like Branded. Basically a mirror match of someone with the same ideas with the Star Leech, which was a huge problem. And then my third loss was a normal loss to basically Fiendsmith Ryziel. There's no crazy reason why I didn't perform at this YCS. It's just that we had a couple of ideas going into it, which I think were fine. I think a lot of pure Ryziel's top, but it just wasn't my day. I made a deck profile when I didn't do well at YCS Dortmund with the Pearly deck. There was a lot of stuff going on that I feel like I should have seen coming. I should have seen that this deck wasn't going to work. In hindsight, I was like, you know what? It was not very smart to play this deck. This time around, I feel different about it. And I think that's also important to acknowledge, is that like sometimes you bring a solid deck and it just doesn't work out, and that's fine. You know, it's not always your day. It's important to look back and be like, yeah, this I needed to do better in order to win. Or sometimes it's also important to recognize like, hey, this time I did fine, but I just wasn't lucky today. Anyways, let's talk about the format. It goes without much surprise here that Ryziel and Malice are the two top performing decks. If I remember correctly, I think there was a top cut breakdown on stream where they made a distinction between Ryziel and Ryziel Fiendsmith, and I think pure Ryziel was ahead. If you feel like Ryziel and Fiendsmith Ryziel are two different decks, then technically Malice was the most represented in top cut, but it also was the most represented deck in the tournament. Overall, honestly, it is a top cut breakdown that looks pretty standard for this tournament, but there are a few notable developments here. Pure Ryziel kind of overtaking Fiendsmith Ryziel as the most popular pick. I am a little surprised that as many people have reached the same conclusion as we did in our testing. At the same time, I'm not surprised because I think they're correct. Right now, for this format, I think Pure Ryziel was better. The TLDR of why I feel that way, the way they are being used in Ryziel at the moment, the Fiendsmith cards, they act like non-engine for the most part, because you start with them going second to bait out some disruptions, or you make a little bit more powerful board going first. That's harder to break. Non-engine cards do the same thing. If you go first and you open a Book of Moon instead of an Engraver, you also make your end board stronger. You also make your combo stronger, because now you can resolve Duo Drive through Infinite Impermanence. Or if your stuff just resolves normally, you have a set Book of Moon, which is also a stronger end board, right? So essentially, the Fiendsmith cards, they just act as non-engine. The problem is, I don't think they act as better non-engine than real non-engine cards. You have to commit like so many slots to Fiendsmith cards that are not actually valuable non-engine. You know, drawing a Lacrima is most likely not going to contribute to your end board or to your hand's playability going first or second. Lurie, same thing. Fiendsmith in Paradise, even worse. When Fiendsmith Ryziel won the last YCS, not Orlando, but Anaheim, for that one, I think it was a very, very, very good call, because there wasn't a lot of Bystials back then, and even Fuva was less popular. For this one, I think it was a little bit different, and I think a lot of people recognized that Pure Ryziel was the better choice for this one in particular. Other than that, Malice, I personally feel like people are gonna laugh because I'm gonna say something negative about Malice, but just in terms of raw numbers, I think Malice had a pretty mediocre conversion rate here, especially looking at what happened after they've made top cut. They got knocked out pretty quickly. Even though one of them went all the way to the finals, it doesn't really feel like the kind of deck that would get the best players consistently all the way through top cut in a YCS, because it's just like, look at people's side decks. I mean, by top 16, we're already down to 2. 14 of them were eliminated in top 64 and top 32. It's just not a deck that converts, I think. The White Forest was cool. I've seen the list. The Mermails performing is also to be expected, I think. On the one hand, I do like Memento as a deck. I think it's a strong deck. I'm still surprised that like 5 people made it into top 64. That's a lot. Mitsurugi is solid performer. Bystial deck, I'm happy to see that. One Branded, I guess, fair enough. One Crystron, I'm happy to see. I was a little disappointed to not see a single Crystron top YCS Orlando, because I do think the deck is better than that. And then obviously we got the man of the weekend. We got Dinh-Kha Bui winning with Fire King, which makes me happy on so so many levels, dude. It's just a feel-good moment all around. Not only is it a rogue deck, but it's also a really cool rogue deck. You guys know how much I love the Fire King grind game. You know how much I've played pure Fire King in Master Duel because I just liked it more than the Snake Eye version. In a format where everyone's like, yeah, you gotta play Malice or Ryzeal or you're cooked. And it's just like Dinh-Kha Bui showing up with Fire King and taking down the entire YCS, going 11-1 in Swiss, basically 17-1 across the entire weekend. Just incredible stuff, honestly. A lot of it obviously relies on the fact that people are not super well equipped to deal with this sort of deck. It is a meta call. This does not mean that Fire King is now top contender in the current format. This is a good deck, don't get me wrong, but like Dinh-Kha Bui playing it like Dinh-Kha Bui definitely makes a difference here. And also just like it being a meta call where it has a lot of pretty good things going for it. Like it can play Impulse, which is huge against Malice. It's completely immune to Bestials. It doesn't care at all about Molcharmies. A lot of things going right for this deck, which I think is pretty neat. And I'm happy it paid off. You look at every single side deck this format and it's like 9 cards versus Malice. Basically, the approach that everyone is taking right now is build your main deck for Ryzeal, build your side deck for Malice. My local sold out of the Fire King structure. I mean, that's good. It's good that this sort of stuff happening gets people hyped. I encourage everyone to try out this deck. It's a good deck. Dweller is a thing. Dweller, I think for this deck is surprisingly a lot less of an issue than you would think, because the game plan versus Dweller is to just summon Garunix, pop this one from the deck, and then run over the Dweller and just blow up the rest of the board in the next turn. This deck is not very explosive. Even though it does mainly function with graveyard effects, skipping one turn of some of your graveyard's effects is not the biggest deal in this deck because it tries to go the long run anyways. So that was my YCS Birmingham experience. One of the better events for me that I didn't do well at. Sometimes I don't do well at an event and it's just like it kind of ruins the entire weekend for me. This one was still a pretty good one. You know, I had fun on Sunday. I also won an Edison side event on Friday with Gladiator Beasts, and we did some cubing on Sunday. It was a fun weekend, so I'm not too bummed out about it, especially after Ka won. Overall, a good time.